I don't know what they're...
Are we starting now? Are we starting? Tonight on Politicat. Tonight on Politicat, how the 2022 midterm elections are shaping the nation and how inflation is affecting our local businesses. It's your politics
right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Michaela Denault.
And I'm Diego Ramos Bachara. We're starting off tonight with some breaking news. Former President Donald Trump is announcing he's running for president for a third time in 2024. This announcement comes from his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. We're going to cut live to the live stream right now so we can see him give some live remarks regarding this address. Stay tuned.
Underappreciated police officer who is ready to shout for safety in America. The police are being treated so badly. These are great people. They can straighten out the crime. They're the ones that know how to do it. We have to give them back their respect and their dignity. This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign all together. Because the only force strong enough to defeat the massive corruption we are up against is you, the American people. It's true. The American people, the greatest people on earth. We love them all. And we love both sides. We're going to bring people together. We're going to unify people. And it was happening in the previous administration, previous to the previous. And what was bringing them together was success. Prior to COVID coming in, the people were calling me, that were calling me. You wouldn't believe it. People that were so far left, I figured they'd never speak to me and I would never speak to them. But our success was so incredible, like never before. And then COVID started coming in from China. We call it the China virus. Some people call it other things. But it was devastating and we built it back and did an incredible job. But when people say Republicans or Democrats or liberals or conservatives, I say we can all get together. And we were doing that. That was happening just prior because the success was greater than this country has ever had. We were leapfrogging China and leapfrogging everybody else, and everybody wanted a piece of it.
Now this comes as Republican voters are still feeling rejections during these midterms, many of these candidates who have been endorsed by Donald Trump himself. We'll have more on what that means for the 2024 elections later tonight, but we're going to quickly pause for a second to take a look at some of those key races in the midterm elections. Now, as of last week, Democrats will keep control of the Senate while control of the House hangs on the outcomes of key elections whose results have yet to be announced. The Democrat Senate wins comes after a Saturday night call that confirmed the victory of incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto over Republican Adam Laxalt in Nevada. This ensures that Democrats will maintain at least 50 votes in the 100-seat chamber, allowing the party to continue controlling the Senate, Vice President Kamala Harris serving as the official tiebreaker. Now we're going to take a closer look at specific hotly contested swing states. Starting off South, Arizona's tight gubernatorial race against Democrat Katie Hobbs and Trump-endorsed Kari Lake, as I mentioned before, was called just before 8 p.m. last night. Hobbs was able to retain her seat after narrowly winning 50.4% of the vote. Lake lost, but was able to win 49.6% of the vote, a good margin. Now, the Senate race was called in favor of Democrat incumbent Mark Kelly, and he ran against Republican challenger Blake Masters in a very tight race in which Kelly won 51.8% of the vote. Moving off to Pennsylvania, the Senate race between Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Mehmet Oz was called with Fetterman winning 51% of the vote. And Democrat Josh Shapiro also trumped Republican Doug Mastriano with 56.3% of the vote in the governor's race. Up north from Illinois in Wisconsin, incumbent Republican Ron Johnson defeated the Obama-endorsed Democrat Mandela Barnes by gaining 50.5% of the vote. And in the gubernatorial seat, Democrat incumbent Tony Evers won his re-election against challenger Tim Michels with 51.2% of the vote. And before we conclude, we can't not talk about things here at home. The gubernatorial race was called in favor of Democrat incumbent, J.B. Pritzker, who won 54% of the vote against his Republican opponent, Darren Bailey. Looking forward, Senate races in Nevada have yet to be called, with Georgia and Alaska headed to runoffs in January. Now, as for the governor's seat, we're only waiting to hear back from tight races, including the one in Alaska. All in all, some are calling the election a Republican ripple, while Democrats have been lauding last Tuesday as a victory. With the results out of the way, let's move on to our panel. Michaela?
Thanks so much, Diego, for that quick recap. Now I'm joined by NNN's Max Rothfeder and Julia Richardson to take a closer look at some of these tight races. Max and Julia covered last week's results during our live election show. Thank you both for being here. Max, let's start with you. Looking to the Southwest, Arizona and Nevada both took a while to call and were tight elections. How did these states decide the majority in the Senate, and what was unexpected about the election results?
Yes, there were kind of four key races that we were watching that we talked about all throughout the night: Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. And Nevada and Arizona were interesting. So we have the results for Nevada, if we can get those on the screen there. One thing that was really key about Nevada was in Clark County. That's where Las Vegas is. The Democrat was able to do really well. Catherine Cortez Masto had a really strong performance there, better than expected. The Republican Adam Laxalt really needed to do better in that county, and it's a similar story in Arizona. I've got the maps for both the Arizona governor's race, which between Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs, and then also in the Senate race, right, between Kelly and Masters. We saw the same kind of story. In Arizona, it's Maricopa County. That's the big city that Republicans needed to pull some votes from, and they just couldn't do it. And so I think that's the big story of this election, is that we talk about these candidates who need to be able to pull votes from the suburbs of these big cities, and the Republican candidates tended to fall more towards the Trump type of Republican, and that just didn't work in these states. In these states, it's one city versus really the rest of the state that kind of decides these elections, and Republicans just didn't do strongly enough, especially these Trump-backed Republicans in the suburbs of these major cities.
Thanks for sharing that, Max. And Julia, let's narrow in some of the interesting points from last week. So Florida used to be a swing state, and now it has turned red in this election cycle. What has changed for Florida's voters in the last couple elections to make them turn red?
Yeah, so Republicans were hoping for a red wave this election cycle. That didn't quite happen across the country, but Florida definitely is seeing its own red wave. The governor's race, attorney general, Senate, Republicans won all of these by about a 17 to 20% margin. Now, one interesting point to note, this trend can be really seen in Miami-Dade County, which has been loyally Democratic in the past few elections, but this time around, Governor Ron DeSantis won it by 11%. Senator Marco Rubio won it by 10%. But yes, in the past, Florida has very much been considered a swing state Former President Obama won it in both 2008 and 2012. And in 2016 and 2020, Trump won the state, but the margin by which he won increased in 2020, which a lot of people think signifies a more conservative wave. Now, we know that less people tend to vote in the midterms when a presidency isn't at stake, but it is also an interesting point to note that Florida's vote by mail and early voting has dropped in some areas by 50% or more. This is reported by WFLA News, which also said on the day before the election, which was November 7th, that early voting had dropped by about 40% since 2020.
And turning to Max, of course, we have to talk about Georgia. For the second time in the row, we've seen Georgia enter a runoff. And Senator Raphael Warnock has also his second runoff in a row as well. Max, what are we seeing the shift in Georgia, and how might that change in 2024?
Yeah, so I've got another graphic for Georgia. Hopefully we'll be able to get that on the screen. And the big thing about Georgia that we've seen is you need 50% of the vote in order to win the election. And that hasn't happened in the Senate race. It didn't happen in 2020. It didn't happen this year. And then it's a similar story to Nevada and Arizona. It's about Atlanta and the surrounding counties, DeKalb County, Fulton County, versus the rest of the state. And so whoever is able to do really well sort of in that area ends up winning. So if Democrats have a strong showing in the Atlanta and its areas, they're able to win the state. In this case, the Republican just couldn't get enough of the votes. Now, an interesting thing, of course, is that we had a Georgia gubernatorial race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams, a Republican-Democrat matchup, and Brian Kemp won by a lot. And he won by a lot because he did well in those Atlanta suburbs. I think he had almost 53% of the vote compared to the 49-49 we're seeing in Georgia, of course, sending it to a runoff. So I think that's the big key. That's what we're going to have to keep watching as these races progress, is these, like Walker, a Trump-backed Republican, more in that branch of the Republican Party, have to perform better. These candidates really, it seems like, need to be more moderate in order to get to be able to win in states like Georgia, Arizona, Nevada.
Thank you so much. And Julia, after the Roe v. Wade decision over the summer, abortion showed up on the ballot, and abortion was one of the issues that Democrats seemed to win. On the other hand, high inflation in the U.S. and the economy was the biggest issue in this election. Julia, given the results of this election, how will these issues play out moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So a poll conducted by ABC News less than 3 weeks ago, or 3 weeks prior to the midterms, showed that voters trusted Republicans more on the issues of inflation and gas prices, while Democrats were more trusted on climate change, gun violence, and abortion. But the economy seemed to be at the top of voters' minds this cycle. I was actually in Wisconsin a few weeks back, and when I asked voters what was at the top of their minds, the economy and inflation came up with almost every single person I talked to. Obviously, following the overturn of Roe v. Wade, Democrats were really campaigning on abortion this election cycle, promising voters that they would do everything they can to protect women's reproductive rights. And as you may recall, a while back, President Biden promised to codify Roe if Democrats made the necessary gains in the midterms. But he said recently that he doubts Democrats will have the votes to carry this out on a federal level, although they did do a lot better than expected. Now, however, a Vox article calls the midterms a resounding win for abortion rights. And on the state level, there were some wins for Democrats. So in North Carolina, for example, Republicans didn't win enough seats in the legislature to override the Democratic governor's veto. And in states like Wisconsin and Kansas, incumbent Democratic governors won re-election and can remain a last line of defense against anti-abortion laws. But this will definitely be an interesting issue to follow leading up to 2024.
Max, Julia, thank you both for being here. And let's send it over to Jonas Blum to take a deep dive into why Georgia has a runoff election this cycle. Jonas?
Thanks, Michaela. Could Democrats grow their majority in the Senate? For the second election in a row, the state of Georgia will have a runoff in December to choose a senator. But why does Georgia have these runoffs? And what's going to happen on December 6th? Let's take a look. Unlike most states, Georgia does not have a winner-take-all election system. In the majority of states, such as Nevada, you do not need to win a majority of votes to become a senator. Instead, the winner is the candidate which received the most votes, even if that total is short of 50%. This is why Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto won the state with roughly 49% of the vote. Meanwhile, in Georgia, a majority of voters must choose the candidate that wins. This is because a third party ran in the 2022 election. Neither Pastor Raphael Warnock nor former NFL running back Herschel Walker received a majority, although Warnock did hold a slight edge. Georgia will now choose between the two prominent candidates on the 6th of December. In the previous runoff elections, Democrats won both seats. The general election is only showing a difference of 0.9 percentage points between the two candidates. although it is unclear which candidate the previously independent voters would support. Early voting for the runoff starts next week. Michaela, back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Jonas. As we saw, the economy was a key issue in the elections as Americans continue to grapple with the rise in inflation. And as prices climb, experts are saying oil is going to be the most expensive way to heat your home this winter. The U.S. Energy Information Administration predicts major price increases for fuel and other energy sources this winter, and Americans are concerned. A Federal Reserve survey yesterday showed that residents grew more worried with an expected increase in gas prices. And inflation dropped to 7.7% in October, down from 9.1% in June, but still nowhere near the Fed's target rate of 2%. Meanwhile, the Fed has been raising interest rates regularly this year to bring down inflation. Last week, we talked to Northwestern economics professor Martin Eichenbaum on what we should expect from the Federal Reserve. Here's what he had to say.
Well, let me start with the Federal Reserve. Most of
How long is this?
you know is that the Fed was behind in raising interest rates to slow down the economy to get inflation under control, and they've been playing catch up for about a year. So I think looking forward, most people think there is going to be a mild recession, not a catastrophe, not a financial crisis, but a slowdown because it's absolutely central that we get inflation under control.
And staying on the topic of inflation, it's taken a toll on the livelihoods of millions of Americans. Politicat's Lena Peterson takes a closer look at how small business owners in Evanston are affected by the current state of the U.S. economy. And we're going to go live to NNN's Politicat's Lena Peterson, who is live outside, stepping out on Faith in downtown Evanston. Lena, thank you for reporting. My question to you, if you can hear me, is how can Northwestern students best support small businesses in Evanston, especially considering the fact that most of them are on a budget?
Thanks, Diego. I'm here outside of stepping out of Faith in downtown Evanston, where last week I interviewed a small business owner. She emphasized the importance of shopping small and importance in supporting small business owners during this economic crisis. And for Northwestern students, many shops and restaurants downtown have a wild card discount, so be sure to check out all that Evanston has to offer. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Lena, for that wonderful reporting.
We've been talking a lot about the impact of the 2022 midterms on issues like the economy, but how will the results of this year affect the 2024 presidential elections? Here's Paris Francois.
Thanks, Michaela. The midterm elections are typically a referendum on the party in power, but this election cycle, the expected Republican red wave never came, and the Democrats secured a Senate majority. Since the Democrats performed better than expected, this could embolden Biden to seek a second term in office despite his recent low approval ratings. On the other hand, most Trump-endorsed candidates lost their races. This could mean that mainstream Republicans are tired of MAGA candidates and would not be enthusiastic if Trump ran for office in 2024. Trump endorsed midterm candidates that were 2020 election deniers and generally underqualified are drawing criticism from his own party. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie said there's only one person to blame, and that's Donald Trump, in regards to the GOP's poor midterm performance. Trump allies have urged him to delay his presidential announcement until after Georgia runoffs to keep GOP energy directed there, although he did dismiss this advice and just announced his 2024 presidential run earlier this evening. Since so many of election-denying candidates lost in the midterms, this could mean that the 2024 elections would be less contested than they were in 2020 if a Democrat were to narrowly win the presidency again. Despite the overall GOP loss in the midterms, Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis took a sweeping victory in his race and even took the traditionally Democratic Miami-Dade County. There has been speculation about DeSantis as a promising GOP presidential candidate, and his strong win in Florida only cements his spot as a frontrunner for the position. Looking at the Illinois midterms, Governor J.B. Pritzker secured a second term as governor. but his post-election speech focused more on national issues than local ones. The governor urged voters to keep far-right candidates out of office. Take a look.
But until the Republican Party is ready to expel the extremists in their midst, we need to do it for them at the ballot box.
These remarks started rumors that Pritzker would run in the 2024 election, but he denied those rumors last week, saying, quote, "I'm focused on serving as governor for the next 4 years." Although Pritzker's win wasn't shocking in Illinois, and other local races are very reflective of the national political climate, with Republican counties in Illinois going slightly more blue. Overall, this year's midterms fractured Trump's base and magnified voters' dissatisfaction with election-denying politicians. This signaling a shift in the Republican Party and making a 2024 Trump presidency less likely. Back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Paris. This election cycle is turning out to be critical for the 2024 presidential elections.
Coming up, in an ongoing January 6th investigation and continuing immigration crisis closer to home, don't go anywhere.
Worried about your friend, but don't know how to reach out?
You could say, "How are you?" or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could chat with them in VR. It's all good. If you think you should check in, yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health.
Whatever gets you talking.
Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Yo, camping buddy. Okay, you guys ready?
Dude, I thought you were driving.
I thought you were driving.
Oh, I never said I was driving.
I definitely can't drive. If you're high, just don't drive. It's illegal everywhere. If you feel different, you drive different.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too
Sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Welcome back. Following the 2022 midterms, all eyes are suddenly on 2024. But for former President Donald Trump's 2024 hope, the ongoing January 6th investigation has much at stake. Politicat's Shravya Pant tells us more.
Thanks, Diego. On October 21st, the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol subpoenaed Donald Trump for his attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. After initial resistance, Trump's legal team accepted service of the subpoena. Trump was set to face questioning from the committee panel, who seek to investigate his contact with politicians and right-wing extremist groups in the lead-up to the attack. Committee Chairman Benny Thompson and Vice Chair Liz Cheney wrote to Trump, quote, "As demonstrated in our hearings, we have assembled overwhelming evidence, including from dozens of your former appointees and staff, that you personally orchestrated and oversaw a multi-part effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election and to obstruct the peaceful transition of power." However, this past Friday, Trump filed a lawsuit against the House committee to avoid cooperating with the subpoena. Trump's legal team said that while former presidents have voluntarily given testimony or documents in response to congressional subpoenas, no former presidents have ever been obliged to do so. Trump's attorneys described the subpoena as a, quote, unwarranted intrusion upon the institution of presidency, saying that the committee already has access to several other witnesses and documents. The committee has declined to comment on the lawsuit, which has been filed just 2 days before the November 14th deadline. This deadline has already been extended and calls for Trump to turn over documents relevant to his communications around January 6th. These include encrypted messages from the app Signal, phone calls, text messages, photos and videos, and any other summaries or records of conversation. The committee was particularly interested in Trump's communications with extremist groups involved in the January 6th attack, like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Prior to news of the lawsuit, House sources said that the final committee report planned to focus on Trump's involvement in the January 6th attack, not on law enforcement failures that day. But this lawsuit might decrease the possibility of Trump testifying in this investigation, as the House committee is expected to disband at the end of the legislative session in January 2023. Trump also launched his 2024 presidential campaign earlier tonight, while the fate of the House investigation remains unclear. Michaela?
Thanks, Shavia. Let's now head over to Simone Garber for a quick update on the top international stories we're watching. Simone?
Thanks, Michaela. Civil unrest in Iran, an unprecedented election in Brazil, and a novel military move by Ukraine are just some of the news in a busy week abroad. Here are your top international headlines for this week. Iranian citizens have taken to the streets to protest their authoritarian government. These protests follow the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman who was arrested for violating the country's conservative dress code last October. According to rights groups, more than 300 people have been killed, including at least 41 children, since the protests started. 32 citizen journalists have also been detained, and Facebook and WhatsApp platforms are no longer functioning in Iran. In political news, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has beaten far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in the Brazilian presidential election. The election was close, with Lula edging out Bolsonaro by only a 1.8% voter margin. Some Brazilians gathered in masses to protest the results, claiming that Lula committed election fraud. Lula, who served as president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010, could not run last election cycle due to a bribery conviction. This conviction was annulled, however, over a year and a half into his jail sentence, allowing Lula to return to the political scene. Ukrainian troops stormed Ukrainian city Kherson on Friday evening, following Russia's retreat from the city just hours before. Ukrainian residents welcomed the troop with open arms, rolling out a yellow and blue flag to celebrate the occasion. The liberation of Kherson is the latest in a series of Russian withdrawals. Ukrainian President Zelensky held a, quote, historic day, unquote, marking a victory in a months-long struggle for independence. And that's all we're watching abroad. Back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Simone. And while on the topic of foreign affairs, in recent months, Republican governors Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, and Douglas Ducey have sent thousands of migrants to so-called sanctuary destinations to protest what they believe the Biden administration's lax stance on immigration policies. On September 14th, so earlier on in this quarter, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a disaster declaration mobilizing 75 members of the National Guard after Texas Governor Greg Abbott bused more than 500 migrants to the city of Chicago. A recent Reuters and Ipsos poll found that Republican respondents ranked immigration as the second most important issue facing the United States after the economy. For respondents overall, it ranked as the third most important issue. Now, a few weeks ago, I traveled to Wisconsin to talk to Latino vote mobilizers about their concerns ahead of the midterms. And at the time, the Democrats on that side of the camp had ranked immigration as their top issue. Here's what they had to say.
The main issue that I'm voting for is immigration reform.
So he has a very strong record of supporting immigrant rights. And his platform right now is that he has strong support for immigration reform with a path to citizenship for 11 million.
And as refugees have been arriving on buses from Texas, organizations here in Chicago are providing them with shelter. Our own Kunjal Bastola tells us more. Thanks so much, Kunjal.
The U.S. Supreme Court has taken on 2 new cases regarding affirmative action. Let's head to Lance Wilhelm, who has more on how these Supreme Court cases could affect admissions and life at Northwestern.
Thanks, Michaela. 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court began tackling the latest in a long string of affirmative action cases. But what's different this time is that affirmative action is unlikely to make it out of the staunchly conservative court alive. The lawsuits allege that race-conscious admissions programs in college are both unfair and unlawful, giving boosts to some underrepresented minorities like African Americans and Hispanics, while harming the applications of others like Asian Americans. A 2015 Princeton University study equated the effects of affirmative action policies to hypothetical boosts in SAT scores. For example, with affirmative action in place, African American applicants experienced an admissions boost equivalent to a 230-point SAT score increase. Meanwhile, Asian applicants experienced a 50-point decrease. Affirmative action in college admissions has been upheld by the Supreme Court in the past because it presents a, quote, compelling governmental interest to maintain diversity within education programs. So how could getting rid of affirmative action policies affect Northwestern? In a Chicago Tribune piece late last month, NU President Michael Schill said, quote, the damage to our educational system and our nation would be significant if considerations of race were taken off the table. A 2017 Harvard University simulation showed that without race consideration in admissions, there would be a roughly 30% reduction in Hispanic students, while the African American population would be cut in half. Colleges around the country, Northwestern included, could experience similar declines. I spoke to a Northwestern student about why campus diversity was so important to him. The current Supreme Court cases may not be officially decided on for up to a couple of years. One thing for certain, however, is that if affirmative action does go away, admissions officers will truly be flying blind when it comes to race.
Coming up after the break, a new drug law in Illinois gaining support. We'll be right back.
Worried about your friend, but don't know how to reach out?
You could say how are you or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You could chat with them in VR. It's so good. If you think you should check in, yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Whatever gets you talking. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Yo, camping buddy. Okay, you guys ready?
Dude, I thought you were driving.
I thought you were driving.
Oh, I never said I was driving.
I definitely can't drive.
If you're high, just don't drive. It's illegal everywhere. If you feel different, you drive different.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
Welcome back. A new Illinois law called the Pretrial Fairness Act gives cops the choice not to jail people for the possession of small amounts of drugs. That means that people caught with less than 15 grams of drugs like cocaine, heroin, or other drugs of that nature on them will not have to sit in jail for days until they appear before a judge. Advocates of the law argue that spending time in jail can have serious consequences for some people, like things like losing a job or going through drug withdrawal. The Pretrial Fairness Act, a part of the SAFE-T Act, will take effect on January 1st.
Also close to home, the overturn of Roe v. Wade in June has incoming college students worrying about the uncertainty of abortion access in their new homes. Politicat's Simone Garber spoke to students here at Northwestern on their reaction to the landmark decision.
Northwestern University first years are starting their 4 years of college in a state where they know their abortion rights are protected.
Reproductive access is still relatively secure here.
comparatively to the rest of the country.
In Illinois, elective abortions are legal up to around 26 weeks of pregnancy. For Governor J.B. Pritzker, who was elected for a second term last Tuesday, access to safe and legal abortions will remain a top priority. And students like DeFilippis considered this when applying to colleges.
I took into consideration the states that I was applying in. I didn't apply anywhere that had those trigger bans.
A New York native, DeFilippis' home state also protects reproductive health care.
People come to New York to get reproductive health care.
And for the years Northwestern is home, resources like the Center for Awareness, Response, and Education, also known as CARE, help the university make sure students have access to all forms of sexual health care.
We support all people's autonomy to have wellness and safety.
CARE, continuing to provide essential healthcare services to the Northwestern student body.
We will always take care of people. We will always find creative ways to show up for community and support people on their journeys.
For Politicat, Simone Garber.
And of course, we cannot leave out the biggest soccer competition. Qatar will be on the world stage later this month as the host of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Despite the great fan attention for the games, the World Cup this year has also sparked Western outrage. You see, during the construction of the stadium, the airport expansion, and other infrastructure, Qatar has been accused of abusing migrant workers. According to the Human Rights Watch, the 2022 World Cup's legacy will depend on whether Qatar and FIFA remedy the human rights abuses and start labor reforms to protect human rights for all. According to the Human Rights Watch, the 2022 World Cup's legacy will depend on whether Qatar and FIFA remedy the human rights abuses and put forth labor reforms to protect human rights for all.
That's all the time we have for tonight. I'm Michaela Denault.
And I'm Diego Ramos Bachara. Have a great night.